I sat there quietly while my wife of 18 years called me lazy, useless, a dead weight who never amounted to anything. The man standing next to her, the one she'd been meeting in secret for 14 months, kept nodding like everything she said was gospel. 30 seconds later, the judge cleared his throat and read a single number out loud. My wife turned the color of ash and her knees buckled so hard the bailiff jumped. That's how it started. Not with paperwork or an argument in the kitchen or some long, drawn-out marital fight. No, it started with my wife of 18 years calling me a useless burden in front of a room full of strangers. I remember standing at the respondents' table, hands clasped in front of me, listening to Rachel's voice echo through the tall courtroom ceilings. The place smelled like old wood and industrial cleaner, typical for the Dallas County Family Court building downtown. The benches creaked every time someone shifted, and I could hear a few older folks whispering behind me, probably waiting for their own cases to drag their own lives through the legal meat grinder. Rachel stood beside her attorney, Carter Phillips, a polished 45-something guy with slicked hair and a suit too expensive for the kind of law he practiced. He was the type who always spoke like every word he said should be carved into marble and displayed in a courthouse lobby. The kind of man who probably practiced his closing arguments in his bathroom mirror every morning. "Your Honor," Rachel said, forcing her voice to tremble just enough to sound victimized, but not enough to seem theatrical. "I've carried this marriage for years, while Andrew wastes money on expensive dinners and pointless business trips. He doesn't contribute to our household. He doesn't support me or our son Tommy. He just exists, burning through resources like some kind of corporate playboy. He's dead weight, a freeloader who thinks company credit cards are his personal entertainment fund." Carter nodded as if they'd rehearsed this speech in front of a mirror, which, knowing what I know now, they probably did. Multiple times, with hand gestures. I didn't look at them, I just stared at a spot on Judge Martinez's bench, keeping my breathing steady and my face neutral. I've always been the quiet type in situations like this, the kind to let people talk themselves into a hole before I bother replying. In sales, you learn that silence is often the most powerful tool in your arsenal. Let the other party fill the void with their own assumptions and watch them reveal more than they intended. But the word freeloader hit deeper than I expected. It wasn't just an insult. It was a deliberate mischaracterization of 20 years of building something significant in the industrial equipment sector. 20 years of relationships, territory development, and revenue generation that put me in the top 1% of performers at Allied Industrial Solutions. I'd heard insults before. Lord knows I'd dealt with tension in this marriage for the better part of a decade. We drifted apart like two ships in a harbor, slowly but inevitably. But never, not once in all our arguments about my travel schedule or late client dinners, did she say anything like, "freeloader," to my face. Carter stepped forward with the confidence of a man who believed his own bullshit. "Your Honor, my client has endured years of emotional neglect and financial irresponsibility. While Mr. Morrison gallivants around Texas and neighboring states under the guise of business development, she's been forced to manage household responsibilities alone. She's watched him spend thousands on unnecessary entertainment while she clips coupons and manages a tight household budget. She seeks full custody of their son, the marital home, and a reasonable share of marital assets to compensate for years of carrying this family's financial burden. Reasonable share. In Carter's world, that meant 70% of everything I'd built over 2 decades of grinding through territory development, client cultivation, and commission-based income that most people couldn't handle for 6 months without a nervous breakdown. Rachel nodded, like his words were delivering divine justice rather than a character assassination built on fundamental misunderstanding of how relationship-based B2B sales actually work. My attorney, James Crawford, an older fellow who looked like he'd been practicing law since the Eisenhower administration, nudged me gently under the table. "Easy, Andrew, let it play out. They're about to step on a landmine they didn't know they planted." But I wasn't angry yet. Not really, just tired. Tired in that bone-deep, weight-on-your-shoulders way that only a man in his mid-40s can truly understand. The kind of tired that comes from building something substantial and watching the people closest to you treat it like it's worthless. Judge Martinez flipped through the paperwork with the methodical attention of someone who'd seen every variation of human drama played out in family court. She was in her 50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back in a professional bun, stern but fair in the way that veteran judges develop after years of sorting through lies, half-truths, and genuine grievances. She adjusted her reading glasses and studied the financial documents with growing interest. The courtroom held that particular kind of silence that comes before something significant happens. You could hear the air conditioning cycling on, the distant hum of traffic from Commerce Street below, and the soft shuffle of papers as people in the gallery tried to get comfortable in chairs that were designed more for durability than comfort. Finally, Judge Martinez cleared her throat with the authority of someone about to deliver information that would change the trajectory of everyone's afternoon. "Mrs. Morrison, Mr. Phillips," she said slowly, each word measured and deliberate. "Before we proceed with arguments about financial responsibility and resource management, I want to ensure we're all working with the same set of facts." Carter straightened his tie, probably thinking this was his moment to shine. Rachel smoothed her skirt and prepared to deliver whatever additional testimony they had practiced. "Are you both aware," Judge Martinez continued, "that Mr. Morrison reported a gross income of approximately $385,000 over the last fiscal year?" The room went dead silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that swallows sound and makes everyone suddenly aware of their own heartbeat. Rachel blinked at the judge as if she hadn't heard correctly, as if the numbers were spoken in a foreign language that her brain couldn't quite process. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "How much did you say?" $385,000, Judge Martinez repeated, this time louder and with the kind of emphasis that cuts through courtroom air like a blade through silk. "And similar amounts in the previous 3 years, with a clear upward trajectory that suggests consistent high performance in his professional field." Carter's face went slack like a mask slipping off a mannequin. The color drained from his cheeks so fast I thought he might need medical attention. Rachel swayed on her heels and grabbed the edge of the plaintiff's table, hard enough that her knuckles went white against the dark wood. The judge turned toward them with the kind of expression that veteran family court judges perfect after years of watching people lie about money. "So, an annual income of $385,000 from legitimate business activities is considered freeloading now?" A wave of quiet laughter rippled from the gallery behind us. Someone in the back row muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Jesus, I wish I could freeload like that." Another voice added, "Sign me up for that kind of dead weight." Rachel shook her head slowly, like someone coming out of anesthesia. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice cracking with what sounded like genuine shock. "He never told me the actual numbers. I just saw the expense reports and assumed." I finally looked directly at her for the first time since this circus began. 20 years of late-night drives home, after client dinners in Houston and Oklahoma City, closing deals until 2 in the morning during quarterly pushes, sleeping in airport chairs during trade shows in New Orleans and Atlanta. All those nights spent thinking I was building something substantial for our family's future, creating financial security that would let Tommy go to any college he wanted without student loans. She never asked about the details, never wanted to understand that those expensive dinners at Morton's and Del Frisco's weren't frivolous spending. They were strategic investments and relationships with procurement managers at ExxonMobil, purchasing directors at Dow Chemical, and operations, chiefs at refineries across the Gulf Coast. In the industrial equipment business, you don't close million-dollar deals over coffee and donuts at a Starbucks. You build trust over prime ribeye and good bourbon, in environments where serious people discuss serious money. But Rachel saw the American Express statements and created her own narrative. Business dinner at the mansion became Andrew wasting money on fancy restaurants. Weekend trade show in Chicago became another excuse to party on the company dime. Client entertainment at Cowboys games became showing off instead of being responsible. She never understood that every dollar on those expense reports was calculated, strategic, and necessary for maintaining the relationships that generated the commissions that paid for our house in Richardson, Tommy's private school tuition, and the comfortable middle-class lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to over the years. Judge Martinez set down the financial documents with the deliberate motion of someone who'd just watched a prosecution case collapse in real time. "We will need additional testimony and clarification regarding these income discrepancies at a second hearing. This matter is clearly far from settled." Carter tried to recover, clearing his throat and adjusting his tie like a man scrambling for solid ground. Your Honor, if we may address the context of these earnings and the pattern of financial irresponsibility that— No, Mr. Phillips, Judge Martinez cut him off with the sharp authority that comes from years of managing courtroom theatrics. Based on these findings and the significant discrepancy between your client's claims and the documented financial reality, we will reconvene in 2 weeks to allow both parties time to present complete and accurate information. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck like a gunshot in the silence. That sound, wood against wood, seemed to echo longer than physics should allow, bouncing off the high ceilings and settling into the space where three people's carefully constructed narratives had just collided with documented reality. Rachel sank into her chair like a woman who just learned that everything she thought she knew about her life was wrong. Carter whispered something harsh and urgent in her ear, but she didn't respond, just stared across the courtroom at me with the expression of someone seeing a stranger wearing her husband's face. I walked out of that courtroom with my shoulders straight and my breathing controlled, but my mind racing through 20 years of marriage and trying to understand how we'd gotten to this point. Outside, Commerce Street was busy with typical Dallas lunch traffic, delivery trucks rumbling past, car horns honking, the distant sound of construction from one of the perpetual downtown development projects. The October air carried that particular Texas combination of lingering summer heat and the first hint of actual autumn, mixed, with exhaust fumes and the smell of barbecue from a food truck parked near the courthouse entrance. But all I could hear echoing in my head was Rachel's voice. He's dead weight, a freeloader. It was funny in a way that wasn't actually funny at all. I'd spent the better part of 2 decades working nights, weekends, and holidays, thinking that providing quietly and consistently was the same as showing love. Maybe that was my first mistake, assuming she understood that the long hours and frequent travel were investments in our family's future, not escapes from our family's present. As I reached the bottom of the courthouse steps, a pickup truck rolled past with a faded American Legion Post 586 bumper sticker on the tailgate. It triggered an unexpected memory of a summer barbecue 3 years ago, burgers and brisket smoking on industrial grills, Tommy running around the parking lot with a group of other kids, Rachel laughing beside me with a paper plate piled high with potato salad and coleslaw. That version of us felt like it had died a long time before today. And maybe this courtroom drama was just the funeral service we'd been avoiding. I stood there on the sidewalk for a moment, hands in my pockets, staring back at the courthouse doors like they might swing open and deliver some kind of clarity about what had just happened. The truth was, I wasn't angry yet. Not really. Just tired and confused and carrying that particular weight in my chest that comes from watching someone you've loved for 18 years reveal they never really understood who you were or what you did for a living. When I drove home from the courthouse that afternoon, the Texas sky over Dallas was that specific shade of blue-white that comes with October heat, even though the calendar insisted autumn had officially arrived. I took the long way home down Preston Road, past the strip centers and chain restaurants, past the Costco where we used to shop together on Saturday mornings when Tommy was small, and family errands felt like shared adventures rather than logistical obligations. I didn't want to face the house in Richardson just yet. The place suddenly felt like foreign territory, like a museum display of a life I thought I'd been living, but apparently had been completely wrong about. Our neighborhood was one of those solid middle-class developments that sprang up in the early 2000s. Brick houses with decent-sized yards, mature oak trees, and the kind of quiet suburban predictability that was supposed to represent success and stability. When we bought the house 15 years ago, it felt like an achievement. Proof that a kid from East Texas who started selling industrial pumps right out of college could build something substantial. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows through the oak trees we'd planted the year Tommy was born. I sat in my truck for several minutes, engine ticking as it cooled, trying to process how 18 years of marriage had led to this moment. Inside, the house felt different. Not empty exactly, but charged with the kind of tension that hangs in the air after something significant has shifted. The central air hummed quietly. Rachel's vanilla candle still burned on the kitchen counter, filling the space with that artificial sweetness that had once meant home but now felt cloying. I walked through the living room, stopping at the hallway wall where we kept our family photos. Christmas mornings at my parents' place in Tyler, Tommy's 8th grade graduation from Richardson Middle School, 4th of July barbecues at American Legion, Post 586, where I'd been volunteering for the past 5 years, beach vacations in Galveston when money was tighter, but somehow everything felt easier. Standing there looking at those images, it hit me how gradually we drifted apart. Not in one dramatic moment or explosive argument, but slowly, degree by degree, like a foundation settling unevenly over time until hairline cracks finally become visible. I met Rachel 20 years ago at Tarrant County Community College, where we were both taking night classes while working day jobs. She was studying accounting. I was working toward a business degree while selling office equipment during the day. We were both broke, ambitious, and young enough to believe that love and determination could overcome any obstacle life threw at us. We moved to Dallas after I landed my first real sales position with Allied Industrial Solutions, a mid-sized company that specialized in pumps, compressors, and process equipment for refineries and chemical plants. The early years were simple in a way that seems almost quaint now. Secondhand furniture, Friday night dinners at chain restaurants, weekend drives to small towns around East Texas just to explore. Tommy arrived during my 3rd year with Allied, born at Presbyterian Hospital, on a Tuesday morning in March that I still remember as one of the clearest, happiest days of my life. Rachel and I were a team then, completely aligned on priorities and goals. We struggled financially, but we struggled together, and every small victory felt like proof that we were building something permanent. Somewhere around my 5th year with the company, when my territory expanded to include Louisiana and Oklahoma, the travel demands increased significantly. What started as overnight trips to Houston became 3-day swings through the Gulf Coast, then week-long trade shows in places like Chicago and Denver. The income grew proportionally. My commission checks went from decent to good to exceptional, but the cost wasn't just measured in airline miles and hotel points. The nights I'd come home at 10 or 11 p.m. to find the house dark, Tommy already asleep, Rachel reading in bed with her back turned toward my side. The weekday mornings when conversation was limited to logistics, Tommy's school, schedule, who was picking him up from soccer practice, whether we needed groceries, the gradual erosion of intimacy that happens when 2 people are living parallel lives instead of a shared one. Rachel started questioning the travel first, then the client dinners, then the expense report she'd occasionally see when I was doing taxes or organizing financial documents. She'd look at a receipt from Morton's Steakhouse, $340 for dinner with 3 guys from Marathon Petroleum, and see waste rather than investment. She never understood that in industrial B2B sales, relationships aren't built in conference rooms. They're cultivated over meals where people relax enough to talk honestly about their operational challenges and budget constraints. The irony was that those expensive dinners were generating the income that paid for everything she valued: the house in Richardson, Tommy's education at a good private school, the financial security that let her work part-time at a dental office rather than scrambling for full-time employment. But Rachel developed her own narrative about my work, that I was using business as an excuse to live like a bachelor, spending money irresponsibly while she managed the household budget and raised our son essentially alone. The more successful I became, the more resentful she grew, as if my professional achievements were somehow coming at her expense rather than benefiting our entire family. The affair with Carter wasn't the beginning of the end. It was just the inevitable conclusion of years of growing apart, of fundamental misunderstandings about what I was trying to build, and why those expensive client relationships mattered for our family's future. I discovered the affair the way most men do, through a series of small inconsistencies that eventually formed a pattern too obvious to ignore. It started with Rachel's sudden interest in helping her friend Lisa with legal paperwork on Thursday evenings. Then came the new perfume, subtle but definitely not something from her usual collection at Target. Phone calls she'd take in the other room, speaking in hushed tones about complicated family situations that somehow required hours of consultation. The night everything crystallized wasn't dramatic or cinematic. I was entertaining potential clients from Valero Energy at Morton's Steakhouse downtown, working through the details of a $1.8 million compressor upgrade for their Port Arthur refinery. The conversation was going well. We were past the technical specifications and into the relationship building phase where actual deals get made. That's when I spotted them 3 tables away in a corner booth. Rachel and Carter Phillips, holding hands across a candlelit table, leaning into each other with the kind of intimacy that doesn't happen during professional consultations about family legal matters. They were completely absorbed in each other, obvious to everyone around them. Rachel was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, something elegant and expensive that definitely wasn't purchased during her usual shopping trips to Nordstrom Rack. Carter was doing that thing some men do when they're trying to impress a woman, gesturing animatedly, probably telling stories designed to demonstrate his sophistication and success. I didn't storm over to confront them, didn't cause a scene or throw a drink in anyone's face. Professional habit kicked in. When you're in the middle of closing a significant deal, you compartmentalize everything else and focus on the task at hand. I finished my presentation, answered technical questions about delivery schedules and installation timelines, and watched the Valero guys exchange glances that suggested Allied Industrial had just landed another major contract. The drive home from downtown Dallas to Richardson gave me 45 minutes to process what I'd seen and decide how to handle it. By the time I pulled into our driveway, Rachel's car was already there, and lights were on in the kitchen. I found her at the sink, washing dishes and humming something under her breath. "How was your evening?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Oh, just helping Lisa with some legal documents. Her divorce is getting complicated." The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly it was almost impressive. "That's generous of you to spend so much time helping her. She's been my friend since college. You help people when they need it." I nodded and went upstairs, leaving her to finish cleaning dishes that hadn't been dirty when I left for dinner. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Rachel's breathing, and trying to understand how 18 years of marriage had led to this moment. The evidence accumulated over the following weeks like interest compounding in a savings account. Text messages that arrived at odd hours, causing Rachel to grab her phone quickly and smile in ways I hadn't seen directed toward me in years. Sudden changes in her work schedule at the dental office. New evening shifts that somehow never appeared on any official schedule when I called to check. Credit card charges for restaurants I knew she'd never been to with me. Boutique clothing stores that were definitely above her usual budget range. The smoking gun arrived 3 weeks later, while I was looking for our tax documents in the home office we shared. Rachel's laptop was open on the desk, and a new email notification popped up from Carter Phillips with the subject line, "Strategy Discussion." Professional curiosity and personal suspicion combined to make me click on it. What I found wasn't just evidence of an affair, it was documentation of a coordinated strategy to destroy my reputation and financial standing. Email after email between Rachel and Carter, planning how to present me as financially irresponsible and emotionally neglectful. They had systematically reviewed my business, expenses, twisting legitimate client entertainment into evidence of wasteful spending. They had analyzed my travel schedule, characterizing necessary business trips as abandonment of family responsibilities. But the most damaging element was their plan to misrepresent my income. Carter had advised Rachel to focus on gross business expenses rather than net income, making it appear that I was burning through money without generating proportional revenue. They wanted to paint me as someone living beyond his means on company resources, rather than a top performer generating substantial commissions through relationship-based sales. The coldness of it was breathtaking. This wasn't just adultery. It was calculated character assassination designed to maximize Rachel's position in divorce proceedings. They were weaponizing my professional success, turning my business relationships and industry-standard entertainment expenses into evidence of irresponsibility and neglect. I printed every email, organized them chronologically, and stored them in a folder with other relevant documents. Bank statements showing my actual income, performance reviews from Allied Industrial, client testimonials, and company recognition awards. If they wanted to build a case based on misrepresentation and lies, I'd counter with documentation and facts. The next morning, I called my company's regional manager, Steve Patterson, and requested copies of my performance metrics for the past 5 years. Steve was curious about the request, but when I explained that I needed comprehensive documentation for personal legal matters, he understood immediately and promised to have everything ready within 48 hours. "Andrew," he said before hanging up, "I hope you know that you're one of our most valuable assets. Whatever you're dealing with, the company considers you irreplaceable in the Southwest Territory. That afternoon, I visited a small law firm near Richardson Square and retained James Crawford, a family law attorney recommended by one of my clients at American Airlines. James had the kind of calm confidence that comes from 30 years of handling high-asset divorces and complex financial disputes. Based on what you've told me, he said after reviewing the evidence, they're going to walk into that courtroom completely unprepared for the reality of your financial situation. Sometimes the best strategy is simply letting the truth speak for itself. 2 weeks later, when I walked back into the Dallas County Family Court, I carried a leather briefcase that contained the complete truth about my professional life and Rachel's calculated deception. The hallway smelled like burnt coffee from the vending machine near the elevators, and that particular mixture of cleaning solution and anxiety that seems to permeate every courthouse in America. The same cast of characters filled the gallery. Older couples clutching divorce papers, a man in work clothes arguing with, a woman about property division, teenagers slumped in chairs playing with cracked phone screens. Real life, unpolished and unglamorous, but unmistakably honest in ways that the drama about to unfold in courtroom 3B wasn't. When I entered, Rachel was already seated at the plaintiff's table, looking significantly less confident than she had 2 weeks earlier. Her hair was styled differently, more conservative, and her makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes. Carter sat beside her, tapping his pen nervously against a legal pad covered with notes that probably represented multiple strategy sessions designed to recover from their first hearing disaster. Judge Martinez entered with the same measured authority, her black robe settling as she took her seat. "Let's proceed," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Mr. Phillips, I believe you wanted to provide additional context regarding your client's position." Carter stood with noticeably less swagger than he'd displayed 2 weeks ago. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge that Mr. Morrison's reported income is substantial, we maintain that his spending patterns and frequent absences demonstrate a pattern of prioritizing personal gratification over family responsibility. It was a desperate pivot, but I had to admire the attempt. When you can't argue that someone is broke, you argue that they're selfish with their money." Judge Martinez leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Phillips, before you continue, I want to address some additional documentation that was submitted by the respondent's counsel." James Crawford stood smoothly. "Your Honor, if it pleases the court, my client would like to present a comprehensive picture of his professional performance and the business rationale behind the expenses that have been characterized as irresponsible." The judge nodded. "Proceed." I opened the briefcase methodically. For the next 40 minutes, I presented what I privately called my professional portfolio, a systematic demolition of every argument Carter and Rachel had constructed about my character and priorities. First came the performance metrics from Allied Industrial Solutions, 5 consecutive years as the top revenue generator in the Southwest region, consistently exceeding quota by margins that put me in the company's top 1% nationally. Steve Patterson had included a letter noting that my territory generated $847 million in total sales over the past 5 years, with my personal commission structure directly tied to that performance. Then came the client testimonials, letters from procurement directors at ExxonMobil, Dow Chemical, and Marathon Petroleum, all praising the relationships that led to multi-million-dollar equipment purchases. Each letter specifically mentioned the value of our business dinners and entertainment in building the trust necessary for complex industrial sales. The crown jewel was documentation from the National Association of Industrial Equipment Sales, showing that I'd received their Southwest Region Excellence Award for 3 consecutive years. The award criteria specifically included relationship building and client development as primary evaluation factors. But the most damaging evidence against Rachel and Carter was their own email correspondence, which I'd printed and organized chronologically. James read selected excerpts aloud, discussions of how to make Andrew look financially irresponsible, strategies for emphasizing expenses while downplaying income, and Carter's advice to focus on the appearance of waste rather than actual performance metrics. Judge Martinez's expression grew progressively darker as the evidence mounted. By the time James finished presenting our case, she was looking at Carter and Rachel like they'd attempted to sell her a broken-down car while claiming it was new. "Mr. Phillips," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd had quite enough nonsense for one day. "Are you seriously arguing that a top-performing sales professional earning $385,000 annually is financially irresponsible for spending money on client entertainment that directly generates revenue for his employer?" Carter's mouth moved, but no sound emerged. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable for everyone in the courtroom. Judge Martinez continued, "Furthermore, the email evidence suggests a coordinated effort to misrepresent Mr. Morrison's professional activities and financial responsibility. This court takes a dim view of such tactics." She turned toward Rachel, her tone shifting from professional displeasure to personal disappointment. "Mrs. Morrison, did you make any genuine effort to understand your husband's work before characterizing him as wasteful and neglectful?" Rachel's face crumpled. I thought he was just... I didn't understand." "You thought wrong," Judge Martinez said firmly, "and your failure to understand doesn't justify attempts to misrepresent facts in this courtroom." The ruling was swift and comprehensive. I retained the marital home and all business-related assets. Custody was split 50-50 with no special considerations for Rachel. Most importantly, Carter's conduct was being referred to the Texas State Bar for investigation of potential ethical violations. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Carter stepped directly into my path near the exit. His face was pale and slick with perspiration. "You think you won, Morrison?" he hissed, his voice trembling with barely controlled rage. "You think destroying my career makes you some kind of hero?" I studied him for a long moment, not with hatred or even satisfaction, just with the clarity that comes from watching someone face the consequences of their own choices. "No, Carter," I said quietly. "I think this is the first honest day you've had in a long time." Rachel stood behind him, tears streaming down her face, looking like a woman who'd finally understood the magnitude of what she'd lost through her own decisions. I walked past them both, pushed open the heavy courthouse doors, and stepped into the Dallas afternoon. The October air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of barbecue smoke from food trucks and the distant sound of construction from the perpetual downtown development projects. As I stood on those courthouse steps for the final time, one truth settled deeper than all the others. The truth hadn't destroyed them. It had simply spoken louder than their lies. 6 months later, Carter's law practice had dissolved under state bar investigation. Rachel had moved to a small apartment near White Rock Lake, and I'd been promoted to regional vice president at Allied Industrial Solutions, with a territory that now included Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, and New Mexico. Sometimes I drive past that courthouse on Commerce Street and remember the sound of Rachel calling me a freeloader. It seems like another lifetime now, another version of myself who apologized for his own success. The truth, I learned, is a powerful thing. It doesn't need defending or explanation. It just needs room to breathe.